After 20,000 protesters marched around Israel's parliament building and some even tried to break into the Knesset, Israel passed the first reading of their very controversial judicial reform legislation. Contrary to what the U.S. ambassador, Joe Biden, and Israel's left-leaning politicians claim, these reforms are a sure sign of a healthy, growing democracy in Israel. I'm Luke, and this is the Israel Guys. Welcome to the Israel Guys, where we believe that in a world of anti-Israel propaganda and Jew hatred, you should have a direct connection to the land and people of Israel. I'm coming to you on Tuesday, February 21st, 2023, from the biblical heartland of Israel on the Mount of Blessing. Happy to have you with us. Make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell and drop a comment if you're a new subscriber. We'd love to hear from you. Don't forget to check us out on other platforms. We're on all the podcast platforms. We're also on Rumble, and we're on all social media platforms. Me in particular, I'm having fun getting on Twitter. So if you want to interact with me, just go to Twitter and follow us at The Israel Guys, and I'd love to connect with you and hear from you on there. We're just getting started. We're growing, but I'd love to have you follow us on Twitter. So, guys, we are coming to you every single weekday. We are also part of a volunteer organization in Judea and Samaria, Israel's heartland, and we have a group of volunteers that just arrived to prune the vineyards. They're actually out in the vineyards right now, just across the street from where I'm sitting. People from the United States and that have come here to serve the land and the people of Israel. And we're super excited. If you want to come volunteer in Israel, check out all of our opportunities that we have going for 2023. Just go to serveisrael.com. We'll have the link down in the description below. We have tours that focus on the heartland. We have tree planting volunteer programs. We have a special volunteer program specifically for young people. So make some plans to come to the Holy Land in 2023. Visit serveisrael.com. So while I was sleeping, by the way, Israel had another earthquake last night, I think around 7 o'clock, and I didn't feel it. But I heard from some other friends of mine that said they did feel it in Jerusalem, but they had another earthquake last night. And at the same time, there was a different kind of earthquake happening in Israel's Knesset. The Knesset is basically like a parliament, Israel's parliament here. So while I was sleeping, I have 5 children, so I don't stay up late. The Knesset finally passed the first 2 pieces of their legislation for their judicial reform. You might have heard about it because there have been tens of thousands of people protesting so-called against these proposed reforms because they claim that it's the end to Israel's democracy, while in fact the opposite is actually true. Hold on, I will explain. But so the Knesset finally brought the first 2 pieces of legislation to their first reading into the Knesset. There was a stormy 6-hour debate. 20,000 protesters are marching around the building. Some tried to even break in. There's security situations. They tried to keep members of Knesset from getting there. But finally, at midnight, and this is breaking news because I'm recording Tuesday morning, at midnight last night, they passed the first 2 pieces of legislation. Here's what they are. And you can tell me, because I want to hear these. If you think these 2 things that Israel just passed the first reading in their parliament go against democracy, drop it in the comment below. The first bill bars the judiciary branch, which is basically the court system, most specifically the Supreme Court, from invalidating basic law. Israel doesn't have a constitution. In place of a constitution, they have what they call basic laws, just their basic governing laws for the Jewish nation, the state of Israel, right? Up till now, the Supreme Court could strike down basic laws that they don't like. So this piece of legislation actually prohibits the judiciary system from invalidating what is in place of Israel's constitution, their basic laws, okay? Let me know. Do you think that goes against democracy? The second bill changes the Judicial Selection Committee so that elected officials actually have a majority vote in selecting judges. Now, if you're from America, as most of our audience is, and we are, you know, that's how the court systems work in America. the people elect a president and they elect representatives to represent them in Washington, D.C. Those representatives, most specifically the president of the United States, he appoints judges. The judges have to be approved by Congress, right, and Senate, and then judges are appointed. Here in Israel, that's not how it works. The current Judicial Selection Committee is made up of a variety of people, of which noticeably lacking are elected representatives, right? But the bottom line is that the majority, the current sitting justices, they have the majority vote to appoint new justices. So the Supreme Court, I think three of the justices of the Supreme Court actually have a vote in selecting new justices. So bottom line is that they have a monarchy kind of dictatorship kind of power because they just elect whoever they want. Current sitting Supreme Court justices elect new justices, okay? So this second piece of legislation that passed the first reading in the Knesset last night actually changes it so that elected officials have the majority say in appointing new justices to the court system. So let me know what you think. Those two pieces of legislation, the courts are not allowed to strike down Israel's basic laws, which is basic laws are in place of a constitution in Israel, and elected representatives, people that the people elect to represent them in Israel's parliament government system, actually have a majority say in appointing new justices to the court system in Israel. Let me know what you think. So, as I mentioned, while all of this is going on, there's been protests pretty much every weekend for the past month in Israel, so-called against these judicial reforms, up to what we've heard is as many as 100,000 people. The crazy thing is, and if you live in America, you probably understand this because we've had similar situations happening in America. A lot of these protesters don't know why they're out there. They don't know what they're doing, and they're not really protesting judicial reform. They're just protesting the fact that the rest of the people of Israel elected a right-wing conservative government, and they're mad about that. And they're being led by the opposition now and incited, even some former politicians in Israel actually calling for violence. They're saying protests are not enough, and the time has come to take it to the next level. They're saying actually fighting in the streets, basically calling for a civil war. So yesterday was kind of a culmination because the vote was about to take place last night. 20,000 protesters marching around the Knesset buildings in the streets surrounding. Some even tried to break down the barricade at the Knesset entrance, had to be stopped by police. There were some protesters even inside the Knesset that had to be hauled out and dragged out. And inside the plenum itself, the members of the opposition led a fierce and stormy debate for 6 hours before things could be brought to a vote. Even violating rules, shouting, calling shame, and violating regulations inside the Knesset. Another thing that was happening is the protesters outside were actually prohibiting or trying to prohibit members of Knesset from coming to the parliament building to cast their votes. So there was one MK that they tried to stop in the streets from getting to the Knesset. And there was another MK from the Likud, MK Tali Gottlieb. She tried to leave her apartment building. 6 a.m. in the morning, she opens her door and she finds protesters outside her apartment. And members of Knesset in Israel, they don't make like tons of money like representatives do in the United States. She just lives in a normal apartment building in a normal part of town. She opens her door to take out the trash at 6 in the morning, and she finds a crowd of protesters outside. Now, she has a small autistic daughter, and so she tries to go out and tell the protesters, can you please be quiet? Stop bothering me. I have an autistic daughter. This is going to really mess her up. It's going to bother her. And the protesters, this is what they tell her. They say, quote, "You can take a vacation day in order to stop the judicial revolution. Find someone else to take the girl, your daughter, because you're staying at home today, ma'am." So protesters are physically telling a member of Knesset that she's not going to make it to the Knesset today. She won't be able to take her daughter to daycare. She won't be able to cast her vote. They're forcibly telling her, no, you're going to stay at home today and stop this judicial reform process. Thankfully, she was able to get to the authorities and actually make it to the Knesset, and her daughter was able to make it to daycare, but her daughter ended up being very disturbed as a special needs child. You tell me, does this sound like democracy? Protesters storming the streets and actually physically blocking members of Knesset, parliament members, from reaching the building to cast their votes? The people, citizens of Israel, elect the representatives. The representatives try to go vote, actually take a democratic vote in the parliament building, and protesters say, nope, you're not even coming. You can't even vote. We're going to force you to stay away. Does that sound like democracy to you? Let me know down in the comments below. President Isaac Herzog, the president of Israel, is more of a symbolic position, and he doesn't have a lot of actual roles except for like appointing a candidate to form a government in Israel, things like that, largely symbolic. So President Isaac Herzog made a public request that leaders from both sides come together to negotiate on a compromise on these issues. Now, to be clear, President Herzog is more left-leaning, so he's probably more on the side of not liking the judicial reform so much, but he makes a public statement. He calls on both sides. I want you to come together. The sides even tried to, the coalition even called, leaders of the coalition called for the opposition to have a meeting at President Herzog's residence, okay? He said, let's get together. Let's have a meeting. We want to hear your demands. Maybe we can negotiate a compromise, right? The leaders of the opposition refused to meet. Former Prime Minister Yair Lapid said he would refuse to negotiate until the current reform process has been halted for 60 days. He didn't say, sure, I'll meet. Let's talk about it. These are our concerns. We want you to compromise on these issues, and then we can move the vote forward. He said, no, stop the process. And 2 months from now, then I'll think about meeting with you. That's what you call blackmail. That's absolutely blackmail. He's saying, just stop. And then maybe down the road, I'll think about having a meeting with you. By the way, Yair Lapid, sorry, my voice is a little crackly today. Yair Lapid, former prime minister, he was interim prime minister for less than a year. He was actually an advocate for some of these very same judicial reforms until he got ousted from office, and now he's the leader of the opposition. He's just decided to just lead the masses against the government just because he's not in power anymore. Not necessarily because he disagrees with the judicial reform, maybe he disagrees with part of it, but just because he's in the opposition and he knows that he can incite the people to rise up against Netanyahu and the current government. So, if you watched yesterday's program with Josiah, he quoted U.S. Ambassador to Israel, Thomas Nides. But just in case you missed that, he had some pretty strong things to say about Israel's judicial reform plans. He even compared to what he said to he compared Netanyahu to basically how he deals with his kids. That's a little bit insulting, okay? For a guy that came to Israel and claimed, oh, I'm not going to get into politics. I'm not here to tell Israel what to do. Basically, he's talking about how he deals, and I'll read you the quote. You ready? Thomas Nides, he says, quote, when we believe that those democratic institutions are under stress and strain, we articulate it. That's what we're doing now. We're telling the prime minister, as I tell my kids, pump the brakes, slow down, try to get a consensus, bring the parties together. This is very complicated. They're trying to do things way too fast. Now, a couple of things here. First of all, this was the will of the people, okay? The current reigning government, they were elected on one of their campaign promises was to reform the judicial system. They come into office first week of January 2023, and now they're bringing their judicial reforms to the legislative process, right? Thomas Nides is saying, you're doing it way too fast. You got to bring the parties together. Well, guess what? They tried. Netanyahu and the other leaders of the government reached out. They said, please, let's sit down. Let's talk. What are these issues? What do we need to compromise on? The opposition and all the leaders of these protests said, nope, we're not meeting. They don't even know what they're protesting, okay? And another thing, that's what we're telling, I'm quoting again from Nides to quote, we're telling the prime minister, as I tell my kids, pump the brakes, slow down. As I tell my kids, is there anything more degrading than comparing the prime minister of the democratic nation in the Middle East to how you treat your kids? I mean, seriously, it's absolutely an insult. So Thomas Nides, in an interview with David Axelrod, who is on a podcast, a former advisor to President Barack Obama, he continued on because it gets worse. He spoke about the Palestinians. He says, quote, I spend 60% of my time trying to help the Palestinian people. This is a guy who is the U.S. ambassador to Israel, stating publicly on a podcast, I spend 60% of my time trying to help the Palestinian people. Are you the U.S. ambassador to the Palestinians, or are you the U.S. ambassador to Israel? Okay, that's just a question I have. He went on talking about just the violence and the terrorist attacks and the IDF's action against the Arabs in Judea and Samaria that are committing violence and terror. He says, quote, "Every action creates a reaction. The IDF soldiers come in to PA-controlled areas, and they're under attack. They kill an innocent Palestinian. Terrible. The Palestinians react to that, and they create another act. It's just how these things unravel. It's tragic." Okay, let me unpack this for you. 11 Israelis were murdered in the last month, less than the last month, in Israel. Okay? The IDF regularly and systematically goes into Arab areas, PA controls areas. They make arrests. They capture terrorists, and if they refuse to be arrested, or if they respond with violence, then the IDF, yes, they open fire and they neutralize the terrorists. And yes, occasionally innocent bystanders get caught in the crossfire. That is part of the tragic consequences of war, right? A democratic military of a democratic nation comes in to root out terrorism and murderers for killing their own people, 11 killed in the last 3 weeks. And as a result, some of those terrorists get killed, get neutralized in the process, and occasionally innocent bystander civilians get hit or killed as well. But what does Thomas Nide say? He's saying, instead of it's just a classic case of a U.S. left-leaning politician flipping the narrative on its head. Instead of the truth is Palestinian Arabs are only killed when they or their people attempt to kill Jews and Israelis. But what does Thomas Nide say? If Israel would just stop killing innocent Palestinians, maybe they would stop murdering Jews. Nope, that's not how it works, U.S. Ambassador Thomas Nide. That is not how it works. If Israel would just stop trying to arrest terrorists and root out violence, then maybe they would stop trying to murder you. Has that worked? Israel pulled 8,000 people out of the Gaza Strip, and in response, they've gotten, 30,000 rockets shot into Israel, murdering countless Israelis? Tell me if that worked. Israel uprooted 4 Jewish communities in northern Samaria in 2005, and in response, terrorism has increased. Does that work? Has it worked so far? So the narrative is, again, flipped on its head. We have to call it out for what it is. It is an utter and complete lie. Interestingly enough, Thomas Nides, when he came to Israel, he kind of came to Israel with seeming like he wanted to keep a low profile. He said he would be pretty neutral. He didn't really want to get into politics and strong statements, stirring up trouble. He definitely crossed that line this week. He made his case clear. Well, he said 60% of his time is about helping the Palestinians here, right? And he goes on to blame Israel entirely for Palestinian Arabs that are killed, most of whom are terrorists or murderers who have killed Israelis or tried to murder Israelis, and they're neutralized while actually trying to kill the IDF have come in to capture them. Amichai Shikli is a minister of diaspora affairs in the Likud party in the government. He said, quote, "I say to the American ambassador, slam the brakes on yourself and mind your own business." Ouch. You're not the sovereign here. We'd be happy to debate with you about international or security affairs, but respect our democracy. The relationship with the United States is very important, but this intervention by Nides is very problematic. That's Amichai Shikli, who is a bold and unabashed minister in the current government in Israel. He's not afraid to call out the U.S. ambassador to Israel when he needs to. President Joe Biden, he had a comment about Israel's judicial reform process this week. To the New York Times, he said, President Biden said, quote, "The genius of American democracy and Israeli democracy is that they are both built on strong institutions, on checks and balances, on an independent judiciary. Building consensus for fundamental changes is really important to ensure that the people buy into them so that they can be sustained." Just a comment. He says Israeli and American democracy is built on these checks and balances, independent judiciary. That's actually what these reforms are planning to accomplish, to bring Israel further into that systems of checks and balances. But right now, it's actually leaning far to the other side, where there's not enough checks and balances in Israel's judiciary system. It overrides a lot of what the actual elected politicians and the elected governments in Israel try to accomplish. So no, not there yet, but that's actually the goal of the judicial reforms, contrary to what the mainstream media will tell you. Guys, one other piece of news. Absolutely crazy. The UAE actually drafted a resolution on behalf of the Palestinian people this week, trying to condemn Israel for building and legalizing settlements in Judea and Samaria. Now, I know what you guys are thinking. The UN, they issue resolutions against Israel left and right, center, every day, before lunch, after lunch. There's a couple of different things. A UN General Assembly resolution, which multiple resolutions are passed against Israel every single year. It's just a slap. It's a slap on the wrist. Obviously, it's not good because it forms a lot of public international opinion. But UN General Assembly resolutions against Israel are non-binding, okay? So they're just like a recommendation. UN Security Council resolutions are supposedly binding, so they're much more serious, right? So this was actually a draft for a resolution in the UN Security Council, which if passed, it would have been binding, and it would have been very serious because it was calling to condemn Israeli construction and building settlements in Judea and Samaria and calling on them to just completely stop. So the U.S. has reportedly brokered an agreement between Israel and the PA that basically the UAE, in conjunction on behalf of the Palestinian Authority, would stop this resolution from going through if Israel would, and this is actually what Israel has agreed to. Prime Minister Netanyahu has caved on these issues. One, they would not approve any additional construction beyond the Green Line for at least several months. They'll delay planned demolitions of illegal Arab homes in East Jerusalem, not evict Arabs that are in illegal housing, right, and reduce the number of IDF raids into Arab towns. And they're also reportedly talking about planning to restrict Jewish access to the Temple Mount during the month of Ramadan, which Ramadan is coming up here in a few weeks. Now, in return, the PA is supposed to drop the potential UN Security Council resolution, and they're going to start doing their part to put down terrorism in its towns and villages, specifically Area A, which is under full Palestinian Authority control. To that, I say, yeah, right. Now, first of all, by the way, I will eat my hat on camera, on air, if the PA starts regularly and systematically putting down terrorism inside PA towns, because it will not absolutely happen. And you guys can remember this and call me out on it if you want, but it will not happen. Maybe they'll do one case, something just for show, to try and show the world that they are. But no, that's because the PA and terrorism go hand in hand. The PA has their own military wing called the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigade that actually goes out. Their goal is to commit terror against Jews. That's part of the PA because it's a part of Fatah, and PA is controlled by Fatah, okay? Don't have time to get into it. Now, and Netanyahu, obviously it looks like he's caved, and I would say he has caved to international pressure. I just read Netanyahu's autobiography, so if I could put myself in his mindset for a second, all of these things that he's agreed to, it's basically a delay of several months. So don't get me wrong, I don't think that it's a good thing that he has caved to international pressure just to stave off a UN resolution, but I do think that in his mind, he's saying, I'm going to delay construction for a few months. We'll stop demolishing illegal Arab homes for a few months, and the IDF will try to curb. But obviously, what happens with the IDF? They will only curb stop making raids into Arab villages as long as terrorism stays down. If terrorism shoots up again, they will absolutely be right back at it. So yes, caving. But I think in Netanyahu's mind, he's thinking, we'll just let let things calm down in the international community for a few months, and then we'll start pushing forward our goals again. So guys, got to wrap up. Went a little bit overtime today. Thankfully, violent extremist protesters are not winning in Israel, but democracy is, contrary to what the mainstream media will tell you. These judicial reforms that have passed their first reading as of midnight last night here in Israel are actually going to strengthen Israel's democracy, and actually they're all very similar to how democracy is set up in the United States. Guys, don't forget to pick up a copy of Jesus Loves the Temple. Just click the link down in the description below. Excellent, amazing book. You will not be sorry that you got it. Make sure to subscribe and let me know what you think down in the comment section below. As always, tune out the fake news and tune into what is actually happening here in the land of Israel. We'll be back every Monday through Friday with your direct connection to the land and people of Israel.